we have our friend Ira Lupa. Would that be right? Yeah.
Correct.
Who's presenting tonight and finishing out the week and finishing out the year for us with another episode from the struggles in Ukraine. I want to thank everyone so much, because I know some of you may leave early or come in and out. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate everyone coming all the time. And of course, you guys know who you are, so I really, really do appreciate that. I do like to mention that Photo Shelter and American Photography and Epson Archive Magazine and Pro Photo Daily have been with us all along, helping us. So with that, Ira, I give you the stage. You can share your screen and off we go.
Thank you, Frank. Let me share. Let me know if everything's good.
Yep, you're good.
So I guess I wanted to start off with a little introduction to give a little explanation of what I will be showing. So I'm Ukrainian. I'm based in New York now. I am physically in New York now, even though I got back from Ukraine a couple of weeks ago, I think 2.5. And I moved here a little less than 4 years ago, just to do my studies at the International Center of Photography. Never been intending to stay, but that's how the events of my life unfolded. So because of that, I belong to this group of Ukrainians who experienced at least the beginning of the full-scale invasion from the distance, which is a different mode of experiencing the war. And basically, the photographs I'll be showing you will be based off mostly my attempt as an insider, as a Ukrainian, as a person who's like very much personally invested, as my attempt to digest what is happening, to get to know my new home, because it was a very different place that I got back to. Different, but also the same. So yeah. Also, like a small detail that my first visit, so the full-scale invasion experience, like the news about it on my sofa in Len City, which was extremely stressful. My home family was there, my friends, so pretty much the experience like most Ukrainians have in the world who are living in immigration or abroad. But my first visit was in the end of April, because my grandma died, and I made a decision to go for 2 days to attend the funeral, because she was really a close person to me, and to take my mom out to the country. And this is a really important element of the story, because those very like swift 2 days were kind of traumatizing, because I just got to see, it was a very anxious time. And should I decline something? Yeah, it was a very anxious time in the media cycle around Odessa, which is where I'm from, and what is going to happen there at the time. So I was, they bombed one of the critical bridges in the region on the day that I flew in there. They bombed it the day before I flew in. So the city was like completely empty and different. There were a lot of military people, and the atmosphere was eerie. In a way, it was my favorite time to be in Odessa, springtime, but streets were empty. So it was kind of unsettling. So my home wasn't like it was anymore. So I left, I took my mom out, and I spent a couple of months with my family in Greece. And here I come to an important element of it all. I felt this pressing need to get back and to spend more time in the country, to experience everything that is happening, because I felt like I'm almost betraying a relationship with my country by just living it in a wrong place, as if when I was living, and it was like very, as I said, unsettling and stressful. So let me start my presentation here. Frank, do you see this table on my screen with like decline and approve? Because it doesn't seem like I can do anything about it, or I can. So that was one of the first pictures that I took when I crossed the Romanian-Ukrainian border. It was end of July, scorching sun, Bessarabian sun, and it's been kind of anxious to be coming back. It's always more anxious to be outside than being inside, which is an interesting psychological trick. And But when I crossed the border, it all changed. I was so happy. I was like, even my vision was, it became kind of like a little blurry and sparkling as if you're falling in love. You know, I was so happy to be back. I was so happy to feel the energy of my home. And I remember like this vision of those like juicy fruits on the side of the road, and this policeman like very tenderly going through them, probably, you know, collecting them for his wife or his family. And it's interesting because before we started the recording, we've been talking about policemen in Ukraine, right? So, and before I made this photograph, I wasn't sure if I'm gonna photograph at all in Ukraine. I didn't know. I took my camera with me just in case. My initial goal was not making photography, was just this internal experience of being at home and just getting to know the country in its new state. And also kind of quickly, I realized that straightforward war photography is not really what I'm interested in, because for me, this is more than just, of course it is, destruction and tanks and all the bad things, but also, you know, since it's very personal to me, it's also people, it's places, and things like that. One of the first things, of course, you can't help but you see when you come back to Ukraine after, you know, the war, the full-scale invasion started and you haven't been there for a while, is the amount of military people around. They're like almost everywhere. This is something that wasn't normal, of course, before, but there is also a shift of how you feel about a military person. Like being here in New York, I know that people oftentimes have this, to put it mildly, like they don't have huge fascination with military people, but it's very different now in Ukraine, because for the Ukrainians, people who enrolled into the armed forces or are in some like other way engaged into fighting for the country, because there are many different other ways. For us, they're heroes. They are the people who we are in huge debt for, because they saved the country for us. They are our husbands and wives and sons and daughters and boyfriends and girlfriends. So it's a very different, I think this is something that people in the West like fail to catch, is that it's, for us, it's us in many ways. Of course, as also something we've been talking with you before the beginning, is the amount of young people who chose to fight, to enroll in the war, sometimes by the draft, but many times volunteers, like the person on the right, who is now a deputy commander, company commander, who's only 26 years old and who used to be, you know, just a tech guy and now is in the army. So like a very radical change in a life, I would say. Or the girl on the left, who's also enrolled in the military. And you can see it's like artistic people who would normally probably like in their daily life before the war would never even think about, you know, participating in some kind of military activity. So that's something to add about how everyone in the country had to change, and some people had to change in this way. Of course, another thing that was pretty obvious is how war coexists with regular everyday life. Like here you see like children playing around, you know, the Russian missiles that were destroyed by the Ukrainian army. This picture was taken in Irpin, which is one of the satellite towns in around Bucha. So it's pretty like they're almost merged into one another. And this is Bahirova Street, which was one of the most heavily affected. And you can't really see maybe this in this picture, but maybe you have a feel of it, that even though this street is heavily destroyed, I'm sure there's been like a lot of casualties that took place in this area. But around me, there was like all this, you know, bustling and people, you know, despite the visual reality of destruction around them, getting back into their houses, trying to restore them, like their buildings, and just get back to their homes, which unfortunately not every person can afford. And as I've learned from a person from Bucha military administration that it's 4,000 only private buildings that have been destroyed. And by the summer, like in the summer, I don't know the exact numbers now, it's been only 18 that officially the government was able to start to restore, and other people just have to stay in temporary buildings and, you know, become refugees and things like that. And we're talking here only about one area. And it's also interesting how, even though initially I wasn't, it's not that I wasn't interested, I didn't want to like theatralize, you know, my own country in a way by, you know, looking too much on the destruction, because I felt like this is what Western media does a lot already. But in case of Bucha and Irpin, it was just a crazy coincidence that, you know, a friend of mine took me there. He was like, oh, I have something to do. I need to grab something from Bucha. And so we're going there. I was like, okay, didn't expect to see Bucha in my life, but okay. And then a local military administration person approached me and asked to do something. So even though there was a huge amount of coverage around this area, they still feel like it's underreported, especially the renovation of how complex and expensive and hard this process is. Of course, like everyone was, you know, covering it a lot when it was, you know, the scariest part of it, when all the, you know, the corpses and the casualties were discovered and all those horrors. But now it's already in a different stage, and hopefully I'll be able to contribute with a good educational story about that at some point.
Yeah, and the people there, I mean, they understand the value of getting these images out, right? I mean, they understand the value of the media, right? You know, like it or not.
Yeah, of course. I can't speak for everyone. I can speak. I certainly didn't feel too comfortable when I was taking pictures in front of people, in front of the locals. So I was trying to do that when they were not there, just not to trigger them with like this, so it doesn't feel fetishizing. I was very aware of that. But what my colleagues, and what later when I got to the occupied areas, like recently the occupied areas in Kharkiv region, noticed is that a lot of times people just approach you and ask you, are you from the press? Are you from the TV? And they want you to make a story, and they want their stories to be heard. It happens all the time. And of course, there are like surreal elements like that, because we're surreal. This is part of the military parade in, on the main street of Kiev, on the Khreshchatyk Street. So yeah, destroyed military cars and different weapons of the Russian army exhibited. And this person was, you know, charging people to take a picture with them, with kids. So it felt like a big celebration. And it was also like kind of like smart idea for from the part of the government to substitute the regular Independence Day celebration with a static exhibition like that.
You know, that's sort of interesting that in the middle of all this, understanding the media to and understanding the population to make them feel good, right? I mean, that's the world we live in, right? I mean, that's a TikTok waiting to happen. Right?
Yeah, I think in Ukraine, media as well as the government have to be pretty aware, and they do take the civilians, the Ukrainians' opinion seriously. They try to, you know, not to irritate people anymore, because they know they're going to be called out. Of course, it's not always such a positive dynamic, but I can definitely feel that there is kind of like communication between the two sides, including the media. Yeah. And of course, a big chunk of the media, because most Ukrainians learn about war not from the traditional media, but from Telegram channels or like different social media. And many of the biggest channels are, you know, being run by civilians or people who are just like bloggers, or not like professional journalists who have like some sort of power. Like many volunteers do that. And so it's a very interesting world in itself. It's, yeah, like horizontal democracy in some way, in many ways. Of course, there are problematic elements to it, but the overall picture is like that. Of course, it was there is a shift in traditional gender values in the country. I would say that most of Ukraine have been pretty conservative and traditional. I think it still is. But on the other hand, we see how these roles have changed, pretty quickly. And we see how many brave women we have. I think a lot of women realized the need to protect themselves, to learn how to shoot guns. And it's also interesting how, even myself, like I've never ever been interested in anything gun related before this war, but I felt like a physical need to at least know how those things operate. So I went to shooting range myself because you feel it's your physical safety in the end of the day. You never know how you will be able to use this new skill in real life, but it just feels right to have an idea of what is happening.
You mentioned you mentioned the young people, and we had discussed that before. Like where the country is going after and now already. With a new government or a new vision to the world after this is over. Who knows when? What's your feelings on that?
I can feel that those things started to change in a better direction even before the full-scale invasion. There's been definitely more civil consciousness, like a better consciousness and more care, and more probably like activist movement was on the rise even before the full-scale invasion. But of course, for now, it's a completely different story. And I have a feeling, of course, we never know how it's going to be and how things going to unfold. But I have a feeling like, especially the young people will be the ones who will not allow the government after the war to function in a way that it was functioning before. I think the government members and the politicians, they feel it themselves that now the people do have more of control than they used to. And especially when, the renovation comes, the renovation process, and there will be a lot of building projects and things like that, that normally people are tempted to, get some money from and do some corruption schemes. But I have a good feeling that this will change. And myself, I'm looking forward to those changes, even between, more right and left, political movements among the youth. We can see that normally they were kind of very isolated from each other. And now, because they participate in a war together, they fight together, shoulder by shoulder. For example, far right people who are against the LGBTQ people, and then the Kyiv Pride and LGBTQ militaries who are opened. And now they have to, be aware of each other, and they have to collaborate. And I'm really excited to see what's going to happen there.
But that is a fundamental. I mean, that is a real change, right? I mean, when different fractions have to negotiate, I mean, they're going to remember that they saved themselves together. I mean, that's very
yeah. I also feel like some of the questions that were on the table for a long time got solved automatically by this war. For example, there was always a lot of conversations and debates, and a lot of parties just dragging this whole thing in different directions about whether we should join NATO or not, whether we should join European Union or not. Now all of these questions are solved pretty obviously. So I think for the government, it's also going to be a chapter of when they will focus more, hopefully, of course, on the economics, on the cultural sector, and things that they were probably neglecting a little, not a little, but big time previously, because they were busy with more ideological thinking and corruption. So talking about youth again, this picture would probably seem, if you showed it out of context, out of my presentation, it would feel and look completely normal in any part of the world, just hipsters hanging out in the mountains. But there is not a single person on this picture who is not an internally or externally displaced refugee, or a paramedic, or someone whose partner is in the army, or someone who's a volunteer. So we can see how, I mean, as banal as it sounds, but like everyone's role in the country has shifted. And talking about refugees and, the way how I was approaching my photographic journey was not, I wouldn't say it was photojournalistic, it was more diaristic, because I was eager to see all my friends around the country. I went to I think 12 towns, because everyone is all around the place now, because people are moving to safer areas, and I got to see a lot of my friends and their different living conditions, and even the question of displacement has played out differently in every personal life in different way. For example, this girl, she went out of the country. She fled the country in the beginning of the full-scale invasion, and then she decided to go back because she felt like she wants to be in the country. This person is in and out, so she spends quite a lot of time with her family, but then she goes to Europe. She splits her time in between, safer place and, Ukraine. This person was internally displaced to the very border of the country, to Uzhhorod, from Odessa, and their partner is from Severodonetsk, which was one of the most heavily affected, practically demolished cities in Donbass. And as far as I know, they're trying to come back to Odessa right now. So you see, it's like such a crazy cycle of just people moving around the country. And this person,
how long ago were these photographs taken?
All of them were taken end of July, August.
Okay.
And this person, like we were talking about animals, is the one who probably would consider going away, but she was not able to. She said, I can't afford even thinking about it, because I have so many animals, like a whole zoo. She has a Guinea pig, she has a dog, she has a few cats, a few parrots, she has a whole zoo at her house. She's like, there is no way, even in the scariest, days of when her city was probably about to be captured, she was like, I'm just staying. And also, photographically speaking, maybe that's an interesting question. What a photograph of a person with fake elf ears can tell you about the war? Probably nothing. But that brings us back to the conversation that I do personally not believe in full photographic truth, and I don't think it is achievable with the medium of photography. But that's a whole different conversation.
Yep.
And this person is a refugee who is living abroad. She just came back for a couple of days. So people make different choices. But also there are people who can't be refugees. I went to visit to meet a friend who's working at Dom Hidnosti, which is translated as a house of dignity. It's a nonprofit that is hosting people with health and mental conditions. And the way it's run by American family. And they told an interesting story how, the representatives, like American representatives, called them in the first day and were like, you have to leave the country because there's war happening. And they were like, no, we're not leaving. We have people who are taken care of here. There's no way we're leaving. And they were like, okay, so the American, we have to tell you, ma'am, that the American army will not come to save you then. So there's, I think, a dozen or so of adults who are being taken care of in really amazing family conditions. And as far as I know, this family is running their house in a way that is kind of like an alternative to a quite restrictive and at times scary orphanage system in Ukraine. And I think in the end, they had to, take all their guys, like boys and girls, out, which was a very complex process, but they got back as soon as they were able to. So there are unsung heroes like that too. little more of the work that I did around Bucha, Irpin, and Hostomel. So this was a school in Hostomel, and Hostomel was one of the first places that were like the intense military activity started on the February 24. I think the first like fight took place there, and luckily the Ukrainian side won. So it is a school where the Russian army was living temporarily, and now it is used, coming back to the story of displacement and how people don't have homes anymore. Now the local administration is working towards making it livable, at least temporarily, for people who don't have their houses, their homes anymore. But the interesting here is a different one. So the inscription on the right, written by Russian army soldiers, says, "Hi, forgive us, they made us do it," which every Ukrainian seeing that will tell you, don't even tell us this fucking bullshit. Like no one's gonna believe you, or no one's gonna feel bad for you because you still did what you did. So there is no pity for the occupants. And this V sign is one of the signs that the Russian army, like one of the symbols of the military, so-called like special military operation, as well as the Z is. So yeah, probably it stands for victory or Vladimir Putin or some things like that.
It's kind of hard to have sympathy for them, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean
possible.
That would be impossible.
Yeah, that's
how are you traveling around as you're taking these photographs?
I was traveling around by railway, mostly, sometimes by car, sometimes by buses. So technically, in most areas where there is no active fighting going on, and even in some of the areas which are considered like a kind of like a border war zone, the transportation system works more or less as it used to be. Of course, there are less trains running, or you can come to the railway station, which happened to me in Kharkiv when there was like a beginning of a massive missile strike and there was an air raid alert, and I didn't know that the railway stations don't work when there is an air raid alert. So I was almost stuck there, about to get into missile strike, but I was able to escape on the bus because buses are like less controlled and have more opportunities to move around easily. So yeah, like that. Of course, if you go to areas were either like recently deoccupied or just deoccupied, you're wary of the mines, and you don't walk around, you don't go into the forest, you just follow the main roads, or you don't experiment at all. So you have to, I would say, like overall, of course, no one is safe in the country, like no one, but there are ways to navigate the danger. For example, if you're worried about like being hit up by a missile strike, then if you go and hid in the shelter every time you hear an air raid alert, which is something people don't do because they just get tired of like going down to the bomb shelter all the time. But if you do it, you're pretty much on a safer side. Of course, like there can be exceptions, but that's how you navigate living in Ukraine these days.
And are you with another photographer? Are you or a handler? Or I mean, you obviously speak the language, so that's not an issue. But are you with another photographer? Are you teaming up?
No, as you see, like in first part of my, because then you'll see the second part, but in first part of my of the work that I did in Ukraine, it was mostly personal. It was mostly going around, friends. And if I was going to like Bucha or Irpin, it's just because I had like some special access. I didn't even have like the press card or something. But in some cases, you can do that as long as you don't take pictures of military people or like military bases or things that are classified or something like that. But I'll talk about it soon too.
Okay.
Yeah, I was carrying my really heavy Mamiya camera, which of course did wonders to my back and shoulders, as it usually does. But other than that, I was navigating it all on my own and just yeah, traveling on my own.
Jason feels your pain.
Yes, I still have it. I have to do something about it. And this person, the photograph, is also, once again, another example of a person who used to be a sailor and now works with Doctors Without Borders. So like a pretty radical change in their life. When I was talking about this photograph, which became a little maybe iconic at this point, like representative of the project, even though it's me in the picture, and I just asked my friend, we were just like, walking around one of the safe natural areas around Odessa region, and I had this flag that I received like as a thank you for some of the volunteering I did from one of the military units. It literally says on the top, the truth is on us, like not really on us, but we are the truth and we are the victory. Like it's not direct translation, but I'm a little brain fried, so that's the best I can do now. And Slava Ukraine. And when I was talking with my friend about this photograph, we both noticed how symbolically it shows the mental state of a lot of Ukrainians, myself included, for the last almost a year, of how we were almost blinded by our country affairs. And as we've chatted with you before we started the recording, that, when the full-scale invasion started, I had to drop all my jobs. And basically to that day, 98% of the work I do is somehow Ukraine related, even though I live in the US, in New York. And financially, it's not always rewarding to be working in that way, but I just can't do it a different way. I just can't afford myself. It's like, I don't even question that. It's just a physical need to be doing something for your country, like the best you can do in any way possible. But with this blindness, in a way, of course, I give it in a positive connotation, but comes the, as I already told, the constant physical danger of being in the country. And this is something that I think people in the world, if they care, I hope they do care, need to be remembering, is that it's an enormous amount of people whose lives and existence is in constant threat every day. Of course, it's not only Ukraine. We have, unfortunately, a lot of conflicts in the world, but at least nowhere else we have a threat of a nuclear strike. But let's not get into dark stuff. Here I want to break it a little bit with one of the few assignments that I did. I was not chasing assignments at all. I was completely in my own zone and treating the photographic process as a personal process. I would even say a healing process to some point. It was just easier to digest things probably with the camera. I did the story for The Economist on the wounded soldiers, especially during the Southern Offensive. And here I want to talk, I was really lucky with the editors I got to work on this story, but I know that there is a problem of international media sometimes not being too attentive or respectful to the rules that are in the country. For example, for this story, it was crucially important to not take pictures, of course, of the faces of, the soldiers, but most crucially, not revealing the exact military hospital where they are, because everyone knows, not everyone, but I hope that everyone is understanding, and the Western editors to this point too, that it's just dangerous, because then the missile on the next day or the Iranian drone can just fly in there. And, the Russians, as well as Ukrainians, use open source information for targeting big time. And I've seen that international colleagues, with all huge respect for the work they've been doing in Ukraine, sometimes we're neglecting this. rules like that, right? But of course, I, as a Ukrainian, I can't, not pay attention to that, and I was really serious about that. But I wish there was more understanding of that, of how can you can actually do harm with your reporting and the way you work in the country, which is in a war. And honestly, this was like this part of the story was my most favorite assignment I ever worked on, even though I had, like only 2 hours and I was about to catch a train to leave to go to Poland and then to fly out. And so it was like crazy rushed. And this person, the military volunteer who's doing her work for 9 years now, like 8 or 9 years, like I think she started volunteering even before the war in Donbass started in 2014. She commits every day of her life, like especially now, like every day to helping the wounded soldiers, like every day. And the range of it is like kind of crazy. It's some critically important medicine and supplies like that. But then the books, for example, we went with her to a bookstore where she was looking for student books for a child of one of the heavily wounded soldiers, because the mom was there, dad was there. The girl wasn't able to attend online classes like most of the Ukrainian kids now do. Some of them go to school, but mostly it's online. So she has to be educating, get her education right in the hospital. And for me, this woman, Natalia, was like a ray of light. Because the amount of love she has was, just incredible for the people around her, for her family, because she has a teenage kid who still requires a lot of work, for, her country, and still finding time to love her clients too, because she's a hairdresser and the way she treats them. So to me, it's like one of those, I already mentioned, like unsung heroes of Ukraine who just commit their whole existence to doing some good on an everyday basis. And I'm really happy I got to tell her story.
And how did you meet her, like, as an example?
How did I meet her? How did I get to meet her?
Yeah.
Honestly, I was just simply sent to work with her as by an editor. But later on, I found out that I have friends in common with her who are like long-term activists. And I was happy to know that my feeling about her was correct and that she's just a superwoman and an awesome person.
Okay.
And just very fun to be around with, honestly, which I think is also very important where you're working. When she was entering the hospital and like how she was cheering up everyone, it's unthinkable of.
Yeah, magic, right?
And here comes the next chapter of my last visit this November. I went to Italy for work, and then I was like, why don't I go to Ukraine since I have means to? And I was really sad when the war unfolded that, Ukraine is huge. And I myself haven't been to all the cities and towns. And I was really sad that big and famous cities like Mariupol or Kharkiv, that I have a lot of friends from, I will never see them in a condition that they were before the war. And Kharkiv used to be one of the most well-maintained cities in Ukraine. It was known for that because, for example, Odessa is kind of like a business town. It has kind of a lot of money, but it's not being treated in the best way by our local government. But Kharkiv was, really being taken care of. It was really beautiful. Of course, and Kharkiv, as for people who don't know, is one of the most heavily shelled cities right now in Ukraine, because it's situated kind of relatively close to the border with Russia. So parts of it, like this North Saltivka neighborhood, get shelled constantly and in a very terrible way. And coming back to what I've been saying, that I didn't really want to focus on the destruction part of it. Once you enter Saltivka, it's hard to digest that. You pass by one house, one building, second building, third, fourth, and like it's dozens, and all of them are either just hit or destroyed, like demolished almost to the ground. And here, to me, like this picture, to me, when I look at it, I think of my hopelessness as a photographer who can't do anything else apart from just taking a picture, which was there all around the media a zillion times already. But on the other hand, when I look at it today, first of all, the memory that comes to my mind instantly is the sound, and I do regret that I didn't record the sound of this destruction, because there are a lot of elements, people's clothing, wires handing, and creating this like really eerie sound. I can't even call it a noise. It's almost like a scary music of sorts. And also, I think by looking closely at this picture, because when we see a building that was hit in a war, how should we tend to dehumanize it in a way, even though like building is not a human, but you know what I'm talking about. And I think when I'm looking at this picture in the whole detail, when I see this elevator in the middle, when I see some of the rooms, when I see this crumble in the, on the lower right side of it, in one of the rooms, which is like fills the room up to the top of the ceiling, I can really feel, how people were dying there. I can feel their pain. So it, it makes me shiver to the bone when I'm thinking about it. So maybe I shouldn't be that hopeless, and maybe pictures like that still make sense. But honestly, I know that a lot of documentarians in Ukraine, mostly Ukrainians, they have a crisis with that, because they're like, we don't know what else we can photograph, because it's just, a limited visual vocabulary of things related to war, like visual keys and visual metaphors that you just reproduce all the time. So how can you photograph war differently?
That's a dilemma, right? I mean, it's a
Yeah.
dilemma. It's a dilemma spiritually as well, right? I mean,
I think spiritually is most important, because it's not just the matter of representation, it's the matter of how do we make people care, remember, and take action, not forget about this, support
sort of
us.
necessary evil.
Yeah, with our photography, with documenting all of that and showing all of that. Of course, like there is a practical element to it of like documenting the war crimes, which later will be, useful for The Hague and trials like that. But also, when we're talking about storytelling, there is this issue. So this dinner in here actually lasted for 6 minutes. I'm going to show you where it was. So when I went to the occupied areas in Kharkiv, around Kharkiv, so we were just, based in Kharkiv and just moving to recently occupied, liberated areas here and there, like around the region. And this city we're in, like this town, is Vovchansk, and it is situated on the very, I think I closed my map, like very border with Russia. You can probably see, so there's like a red Vovchansk, so it's really close. And the reality of such border towns, which people don't talk about too much, is that when you have a missile strike, it's, of course, they hit the civilians, of course, it's chaotic, but more or less, especially now when we know that the Russians target the civilian infrastructure to like impose a huge blackout, like a total blackout. So there is kind of like a target, but in areas like that, it's just a massacre. It's chaotic. They just shoot, from self-propelled artillery, from mortar shells, just whenever they want. And when we've been visiting, and I'll tell you about this cultural mission, like the city of Vovchansk, this town that was just deoccupied, we were in the shelling, and it's kind of a little unsettling feeling. You have this adrenaline rush when you start hearing the shelling, and you know that it is very random and everything can happen. It's very, very unpredictable. And they can shoot whatever, like the hospital or the school, or they don't have any mercy at all, unfortunately. And so yeah, here we see a group of military. It's basically based around pop stars, like really famous pop stars in Ukraine. Here they are on the left, who enrolled into the military and whose mission for now is traveling around the occupied areas where people, are recovering after the occupation, trying to get back to their lives, are still being shelled big time, because of course, like normally the army can't retreat like too far away, and they're still in the reach of shells and things like that. So they go this like mission that is called Cultural Forces. They go to such areas to cheer people up, to sing songs, and just uplift people's spirits. Also for people who are in this weird, because the closer you are to the Russian border, and in the more, if the area you live in is more Russified, some people are having, they can be having like some unclear political position, even after the occupation. Of course, like mostly these people, they fled to Russia, but people need to feel that Ukraine cares about them, Ukraine loves them, Ukraine wants them back. And this is part of the thing that these people are attempting to do, which I find like a really nice initiative. And the most important thing, as once again, as I say, in those deoccupied areas are people. And here, this person covered in Ukrainian flag is listening to the concert by those pop stars, really uplifting, mostly patriotic songs, and a lot of fun and jokes and direct interaction with the crowd. I've never seen an audience that thankful. So for the whole hour and a half or 2 hours of the show, they were just standing and listening so attentively and with such, just the most grateful listeners I've ever seen in my life.
Is this all organized in a very systematic way, or they just show up somewhere and people know that they're there and people come? Like, how is that organized?
I think people do know in some way. I'm not sure about how exactly they inform the people. I think there is like in some areas, like I'll show in the next picture, like here it's only 200 people left in the village, so it's pretty easy to organize them. I think this picture was taken in Kupiansk, which is a little more populated. I mean, much more populated because it's a town. I think they get informed, and these people, they come back, like the cultural forces. I even myself met, just walking around in the city, a person with a guitar, and he was calling his neighbor like, there is a concert, just go check it out. It's Kolya Serga, like a famous singer singing there, like go check it. And we started talking, and he was like, oh, actually this singer gave me this, musical instrument, because the last time he's been here, I told him I have this dream to play guitar. And I've been in Russian occupation for half a year without any. So the thing I think many people internationally don't realize about what being in an occupation is not what Russian propaganda is telling you. Like they come and there is like a beautiful, nice Russian life there. People are actually, they don't have any connectivity. They only have Russian TV. They have no idea of what is happening in terms of the war. At times most of the times they think there is no Ukraine anymore. Russian military tells them no one is fucking caring for you. They're not gonna, liberate you. We're gonna care for you. We're gonna love you. But it was really pleasant for me by talking to like really random people in this area, which is like predominantly Russian speaking and like so close to the Russian border. There was not a single person who told me that everyone was waiting for Ukraine. Everyone told me they were praying for it to come back. And it all happened pretty abruptly. So they literally say it was like Russian army in the night, and in the morning, there were already like Ukrainian military. And it felt like this person with a guitar who was, unfortunately, I don't have a good photograph of him, but he was so shiny and happy. And he was like, it was the best day of my life. And he was saying about the lack of communication, like because they were forced to watch only like Russian TV. But he said we had our, systems of like talking to neighbors. And one day we would see on Russian state TV that they say like the Ukrainian army shelled, like for example, Kupiansk. And we know, or like our neighbors live in this area and they know it was Russian army going there and deliberately shelling it, like the civilian houses, to get this picture for the media. So I was really happy to see that some people, like many people, most people are still,
They get it.
they get it. They get it. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
not being
That whole
hypnotized.
that music duo that's so civilized, in this craziness of war,
Mhm.
that the people crave that, need that, and they get that. It's reminiscent. I mean, only the older people here. It feels like Bob Hope. Bob Hope was one of these comedians who would go to different places where the Americans were fighting, and there'd be entertainment, and that's what this feels like.
Exactly. Yeah, I was
You
thinking about it too.
know, so you know who Bob Hope is?
I don't know about him exactly, but I know about this practice during
Yeah.
the wars that took place.
I mean, that's what I mean. These people are. I mean, yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, as this picture, you can really see that they are the most grateful audience, and like for the whole time they were just like staring and
What
musicians and having so much fun.
somebody will know. You put in the chat room. There's that parrot puppet show. An old photograph where the kids are watching the puppet show, and then that's what this feels like. Everyone is just so excited. I forget who took the shot.
Yeah.
It's a classic shot. It slips my mind, but that's what it feels like. Someone will remember that shot. William, remember that shot for me.
Yeah, I would say there is excitement, but as war is not over yet, there's still, I think this picture like shows it like pretty obviously that there is also like still like tension, and a lot of people are sad. They don't know where their life, how it's gonna like unfold from now. A lot of people were approaching just to tell their story. They're so willing to talk. Yeah, and as grim as the picture looks, it actually is an amazing pizza initiative that was started by a person from Scotland, from some royal background, who was wearing a kilt. And he was, cheering people up like so nicely. And so yeah, there was like a bittersweet mix of always of happiness and sadness. And this is Stary Saltiv again, and this is a local art school. So I think in order to feel what probably the people who live in Stary Saltiv or like other affected areas feel, I think all of us can just remember like any art school we know and just imagine seeing it, or like that we once attended, and imagine one day seeing it in this way. And on the top, it's like a patriotic Ukrainian poster, like banner with a beautiful verse about the Ukrainian language, which was there before the war. Of course, in the nature of military activities, that the bridges are being shelled and deliberately bombarded, and they explode them deliberately when they're retreating, or they want to cut off the supply systems for just as part of military strategy. And when we were trying to get from Stary Saltiv to Vovchansk, we had to cross it, and every civilian has, in order to get to the land, they have to cross the river, which is very romantic, but it also takes a lot of time. And this is, I think, given that bridges would take a lot of time and effort to be restored, and no one knows when this process will start because the war is still ongoing. These people will still be cut from the mainland, so-called mainland, for a long time. So that's one part of the reality. And this woman, she was, if any one of you knows the Ukrainian Odessa-born director Kira Muratova. She seemed like one of heroines from her movies. She was very almost eccentric, and she was talking a lot. She was thanking those guys from this cultural mission, the singers, for coming, and she was, like a little jittery. And later I was like, oh, what an interesting and also like just strange woman. And there was like this very absolutely amazing, unusual light on that day hitting her face. And in the end, later on, I've learned that she was, I know that she's open about it, so I can talk about it openly. It's like, it's not private. That her husband used to be in Ukrainian military. And of course, when the area is occupied, the first thing Russians do is that they seek for civilians who have some connections with the military, who are relatives of the military. And most of the times, I don't know the exact story of this woman, but they can kill them, they can torture them. So all the crazy things can take place. And I can't even grasp and embrace the amount of stress and trauma that this woman most likely has to possess. Yeah, and it's like an eerie element to it. Like when you hear all the shelling, you also see the Orthodox cross, which is meant to be uniting Russia and Ukraine in a religious way. But as we see, it's of course the topic of a whole different conversation. Actually, it's not working anymore. And here, like two pictures on the left, the one in the first row and the first one in the second row. I have to say, even though I've been to Bucha, I've been to Irpin, I've been to those deoccupied areas. I've seen a lot of footage from other journalists or documentarians or artists. But this area, which is called Kansidalivka, it used to be a little small village. The amount of destruction I've seen there was unthinkable. I've never thought I'll see anything like that in my life. And the volunteer who dropped me and my fellow artist who was with me on that day, Yana Kononova there, he left us there, and it's really close to the front line. So they were telling us that we don't have to go further because an offensive might start on the next day. So, and there are still civilians living in this area, like a few of them, but the amount of destruction and war crimes and just inhumanity is striking. It's like a whole panorama. We stayed there for like 30 minutes or half an hour, and I was just walking there with my eyes and mouth shut wide open, because it was difficult just to digest this when you see it with your own eyes. And I thought I'm already kind of used to it. And it's there is this effect when you see even destruction on the media a lot, you don't react on it like that strongly in real life. But once I learned that Russian army, when they were retreating, they dropped 6 air bombs on a tiny village, and they killed a lot of civilians, and then the snipers were killing the civilians. It's just like this amount of absolutely insane and unneeded, avoidable violence is shocking. And on the right, like this vertical row, is a torture room in Kupiansk. So what Russians do, it's once again to destroy the stereotype of a beautiful Russian world in the areas that they just annexed or occupied and kind of brought back to Russia, as they say, is that the first thing they do, and everything you see with your eyes, so it's not that I'm just a Ukrainian propagandist here. I'm just, just telling what is pretty obvious in the area. The first thing they do is they establish some kind of administration, which is a torture administration. This room on the top right, I think it was at some point, there were 60 people held in there, and not all of them militaries. Mostly they were just civilians who were the Russians were trying to find if they have any connections. So it would be older people or kids. We just got those terrible news from Kherson about the torture rooms like that for the kids. So I was not surprised because I've already seen this happening here. This picture, the round one, is a Russian army guy. You can see it here because for some reason I can't zoom in when I'm screen sharing. But this grand lady on the left, she became a viral meme in Russia as, someone who cheered the Russian army with a Soviet flag when they came to liberate. And it's been just one babusa among many of them. So she became like just a meme. And I know that then the story had like a very weird continuation, as if then she showed up with a Ukrainian flag or something. I don't know the details, but it brings me back to the thought about how this war is also the most televised and the most streamed, and how the meme culture and even the jokes influenced maybe not the direct, of course, military actions, but the way how people learn about it. So coming back to this idea that photojournalistic imagery, as important as it is to this day, but it's, we're developing new ways of how we learn about war. And this text on the bottom is a song, Katyusha, like a famous Soviet song, like a war song. And they were forcing 5 a.m. after they did like some electric shock on people to sing it many times. So it was like kind of a torture. And this brought me back to like a memory, which is kind of scary to me now, when I was in Mexico, when I was doing some, touristic shaman ritual, like a temazcal, like a sauna with tourists. And they were mostly Ukrainian and Russian tourists because, we speak like, at least most of us speak Russian language. We share it, so we can go in one group as tourists. And then the shaman asked us to sing one song that we all know and we relate to. And we were singing this song. It was like 10 years ago, like long ago, but to me, this memory is really unsettling now that I see how something that was at some point thought of as something that can unite our very different nations can be now used in this way.
Yeah, Ira,
Yes.
does all of this hurt particularly more, because you've seen this in other places of the world, because it's your home? Can you talk about that? I mean, because this is your nation, and
Yes.
seeing what's happened to it and walking upon that destruction.
Mhm.
What's the difference between being at home and being somewhere else for you?
Like overall on everyday basis, or like somewhere
Yeah.
else, like working?
Yeah, the working piece of it and the emotional piece of it.
Honestly, for me, as a technically some sort of an immigrant, it's a topical question these days. And especially after my trip in summer, I really had an identity crisis, because as I told you, like I've never been intending to move to the US. It's just like how the events of my life unfolded, and that's where I became effective and needed for some reason, things like that. Just life works in this way sometimes for us. But I really had a crisis of like whether I should stay here or whether I should get back, because I feel like my country needs me right now. And probably, but then I also feel on the other hand that I can also do like a lot of good things for my country from where I am now. And talking about how I feel at home and not at home, I don't know, it's an interesting question. At home you feel at home. You know everything, you get the jokes, you get the energy, the mentality is clear to you. You just feel in your element. It's not that I don't feel like in my element, but home is home. And even if I become like American citizen one day, I will always be Ukrainian, and I think I will never become American. So that's I a big story about identity and how it can be less fluid or more fluid for different people. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah,
it's
it does.
a really complex question. Yeah.
Yes.
And so then I got back to Odessa, my hometown, and this picture, which probably doesn't look that exciting, actually has and needs a lot of context. So this is when I was leaving Kharkiv, there was another huge missile strike that took place, the massive one, and of course the energy blackout took place all around the country, and in some places like the harm was more than in others, and Odessa was exactly the place which was in that occasion affected more heavily. So there was no, when I got back to my hometown, which was from where I was intending to go to Moldova and then fly back to the US, there was almost no light, no electricity, no phone connectivity, which is also something that is, when you don't have electricity, you also don't have phone connectivity, you don't have internet for 3 or 4 days, which is a very unusual state of being, honestly. But this thing in the middle, yeah, you can see that the windows are all just pitch black because I came all the way down to the center of the city on my car. And I saw only, because now they use like a lot of power generators to produce at least like some light in areas where people can gather, can warm up, can charge their phones, can get some internet. Some of them are established by the government, but also like restaurants and businesses are kind of like becoming like such hubs for human connection and like shelters of sorts these days. And this stage, I deliberately went to the center of the city because I really wanted to see. It is the very heart of the city. And growing up in Odessa, I spent a lot of time by that monument that was there behind that fence, and the monument that was before the one that was there. So when I was growing up, there was like a Soviet army monument, then it was demolished, and there was a monument to Catherine the Great, who is said to be a founder of Odessa, but historically it's a more complex fact, and it's not really like that. And so as now we, as Ukrainians, are rethinking our history, our heroes. I mean, it's been going on for a while, but in some areas, like Odessa, which is also like a little more Russified than probably Western Ukraine, even though there are like such amazing activists and pro-Ukrainian volunteers coming out of Odessa. So it's almost a myth that it's so Russified. Maybe I am an example myself because I've never been pro-Russian in my life, even though Russian is my first language that I learned in life. And there was, we have a war happening in the country because of the Russian imperialism and colonialism. And then in the center of the city, we have a monument to a person who's pretty connected to the Russian Empire and was, she was the one who heard the Cossacks, who were the famous Ukrainian fighters, and they say that historically it's why Ukrainians are such amazing fighters, because we have this heritage of Cossacks. So she was kind of like an evil woman in terms of Ukrainian state. And now it was a point where we have to rethink the history. But in Odessa, it was a huge back and forth with the government because our like mayor is a little shallow, and he didn't want to like demolish or hide this monument. But there was a huge social pressure on him. People were attacking the monument with like red paint or other different methods. And in the end, they finally decided, after like a lot of time of like during the wartime of like a lot of pressure from the society, that they have to demolish it. And I think the plan for now is to create some awkward Empire and Soviet state park where the statue will be. I mean, maybe not awkward. It's kind of also like part of the history, so it doesn't have to be fully erased, of course. But there are different like things like that happening. I have no idea what will be the next monument in here, and I know for sure that it will change Odessa because it's the very center, the very heart. And yeah, struggling in the blackouts. This is, I mean, maybe it doesn't sound that unsettling, but this is psychologically and physically a hard thing to endure. Especially like my heart hurts big time when I think about older people, for example, who live on the top floors. and maybe they didn't have any people around them, like any relatives who can help them, or like people with small children who are not able to live. So it is hard, and people lose jobs because of that, because they don't have stable connectivity. But on the positive side of things, Russia uses this like civilian infrastructure strikes, as they say, at least in their propagandistic shows, in order to press the civilians. So they come to the Ukrainian government and say, hey, maybe we can do some peaceful agreement because we're sick and tired of that. But I'm actually happy to see, and this was the reason why I wasn't allowing myself to get like to stress and to stir crazy, and because I've seen how people who were there for the whole time of the full-scale invasion, I mean, they were mentally hurt by these blackouts, because they're really like, you know, mentally they are not really great for your mental health, let's put it this way. But they were like, oh, come on, like we've survived all this shit, we're gonna survive this too. And the general mood for most of the people is not sad, but angry. So there is no way, and no one is even thinking of pressing the government. It doesn't even cross anyone's mind. There's been like a couple of instances where like small groups of people were protesting when they didn't have like light for 5 days, but then they found like some connections with like Russian propagandists or something. So it's also a moment of unity in this struggle. Yeah, you wanted to ask a question, Frank?
No, I didn't hear what you said, but then you made sense. Now I understood exactly what you were saying.
Mm-hmm. Great. So yeah, when you're in the blackout like that, you look from the distance, you see your neighbor having lights, and you're like, oh, why is he having light on and I don't? Because, you know, part of it is they turn off and on the lights systematically, like among other territories. So whenever someone has light, like your friend, you just go there, you take a shower. So it's also a moment to unite. And I want to end my presentation with this like really quick collage, which I think will define the way how I approach these photographs in the future, because as you felt from my presentation, I feel like they're not enough. So this straightforward photography and documentation is important, and I'm happy to show it to you and to talk about all of that. But I feel that in order to have more impact as a story, it needs something more about it. And here on the background, it's a paper from my granddad, written by Odessa Military Tribunal. So he was wrongfully imprisoned for 16 years in Stalin labor camps for nothing. And this paper was to, after 16 years of like a huge struggle in a labor camp where he became disabled too, they just rehabilitated him saying that it is for lack of corpus delicti. So like saying that you were fine, we're sorry, like you just spent like 16 years in a labor camp just for nothing. And you became disabled and just didn't fulfill your life mission, because he was really into psychology and like scientific work, and he was never able to push his scientific work through after everything that he had to endure. And he was, by the way, of Ukrainian Cossack heritage, but also like a normal Soviet person. And then the Soviet state that he believed in, I think he wasn't anti-Soviet before he got in the labor camp, and that's what they did to him just for nothing. And it was happening to millions and millions of people. And on the front is actually my refugee nieces in Greece. I took this picture in Greece. And for me, it's crazy how I think I'm in the process of realizing how this war is like a prism where so many chapters of my life collide and make some weird, scary sense, in order how the same evil that is the root of what happened to my grandfather, what happened to my small nieces, what happened to my friend who was killed for being pro-Ukrainian in Odessa in 2009. And so many chapters of even my personal life are somehow connected or somehow affected by the Russian imperialism and Russian colonialism. So it is to say that, unfortunately, I know there is like a big conversation in the West how Ukraine should start the peaceful negotiation. But unfortunately, we Ukrainians got to learn for like centuries of oppression that this is not something that will help. And even in, last years, Russia has always been using peaceful agreements, unfortunately, just to regroup and, finally start a war like they started right now, like a full-scale war. So, yeah, we need to work with the root of all of that. And maybe this is something that we'll be able, like, if we stop the Russian imperialism and colonialism, which sounds like a big and unthinkable thing to do. But even if we just simply win this war, and if the world helps Ukrainians to win this war, this will be a huge contribution into something bigger than just the survival of one country. And because also we have all the other post-Soviet countries and Baltic countries and everyone who knows pretty well what this colonialism and imperialism is and the dangers the potential dangers of it. So I want to thank all of you for being interested in all of that and probably participating in this never-ending fight. In Ukraine, we joke that Putin started a 3-day war that lasts for 10 months now, but that was there for centuries. So let's hope we will, in our lives, see the end of that in this or that way.
Yeah, so let me ask you, you could stop sharing now. Let me ask you, like, how do you deal, like, what do you, because I asked most photographers the same question. How do you deal with, you recovering mentally after, going and seeing and photographing, and then you come back and you're now in Brooklyn? How does that work for you? Like, what do you do?
Honestly, so when I got back from my summer trip, it was really hard being in New York, and maybe that was one of the reasons why I got back there again. But for now, I feel really glad to be back to my routine. Not because like I really like, if I had a chance to be in Ukraine, I would be. I just don't, because like my place is absolutely unlivable right now. I have a refugee living in my apartment right now in Odessa, so I feel like it's more important for them to be there, and I don't want to like make their situation worse. I don't have any relatives left in the country. I have friends, but it's hard to work there because there is no light. And I'm kind of happy to be back to my routine in New York. I'm going to the gym 5 times a week just to switch my mental, from mental state to physical state, and this helps me a lot. Talking to friends, being around Ukrainian community who is like really doing a lot of exciting things these days in New York. I'm honestly like spending way too much time with them even these days. So just being around people who understand you, but also around my, New York friends who support me. And this is something I always say, that one of the beautiful things about this war is the amount of help and understanding we got a privilege of getting, because, some people who live in some other military conflicts and wars, they don't have this privilege, nor like most of the times they're not being as supported as we are globally. And, we know that and we appreciate that. And yeah, so one of the most beautiful things about all of what is happening is, just feeling the support and love. And, it can be simple things, just your classmates, the classmate from the school, like reaching out and sending, because I do fundraising like all the time, like, it's small, but that's all I can do, and just sending you like a good amount of money, or just like coming by to show, me some fun movies. So like feeling a lot of love for people like around me, and on a bigger scale, like even you guys, like gathering here today, taking your time to listen, to look at my work, to listen about Ukraine. So this is very, very helpful. It really helps a lot mentally, not being alone in all of that. And I often mention my friend, I've been mentioning this in one of the previous talks, but I think it's like such a great example. My close friend is from Armenia, another post-Soviet state, and of course they have their, war and conflict with Azerbaijan for a long time. And I remember in the beginning of like our full-scale invasion, I was so stressed out because like I posted like some donation lists that went viral, and there were like hundreds of people writing me every day, and I took a mission on responding to all of them. And I was like also like every friend of mine or every acquaintance was checking on me. How are you? Like, how is your family? Sometimes it was even like a little too much. And I told her that I was like, I'm like a little even like worn out by all those messages and like people asking how am I doing? Like, of course I'm not doing well. And she said, like, don't ever say that, because you don't know how it feels when no one cares and when no one writes you and when like it is all happening and the world is silent. But also I should say that the Ukrainians also know that, because we got some attention in 2014, but for 8 years, we were pretty much ignored too and misunderstood and all that.
One thing to ask you, put in the chat room your website so people can go and see all of your work and new work. And I have to say, everybody in the chat room just loves your presentation, and so grateful.
Thank you
for what you did. So yeah, just type in the chat room your.
I must apologize. My website is down right now, but I will
Okay.
send you. I promise to bring it back in a week because I'm updating it. So
Okay,
it's
good.
not working right now, but also I'll send my Instagram so people can, track some things. I get a little crazy in my stories sometimes, but that's part of it.
Yes, that's part of who you are. So, if anyone has any questions, you can put it in the chat room or just raise your hand. But I cannot thank you enough, Ira, for
I
doing
cannot thank you enough, Frank.
Yeah. Jay, open up. Mary has a question.
It's not a question. It's just, I'm at a loss for words, Ira, how eloquent your presentation was. It wasn't just the typical, like you said, pictures of war and destruction. Of course, those were included, but there were other elements so we could see the humanity of it, the ongoing humanity. I'm of Ukrainian background. I still consider myself Ukrainian American, that never goes away. But on behalf of, I don't know, I can't say all Ukrainians, I can't speak for all Ukrainians, but we are so grateful for your presentation, and your eloquence, again, was just amazing. Дуже дякую.
Thank you so much. Дуже дякую вам також. So
Thank you,
grateful
Mary.
for a grateful audience.
Yes. No, and also, know that you have a platform. When you have more work, new work, please let me know, because we'll be doing this. Unfortunately, we will be doing this more, again, in the coming year. But if there's other work that's really important to you that you want to get out, we don't just do the Ukraine issue. We do everything. So know that you have a platform, at any time to come back.
Thank you. I will be back for sure.
Yeah, and one thing, so what I like to do is give the photographer the last word for the night. So, leave us with any wisdom that you have, or just, thank you again.
Yeah, I just want to say like the same simple thing, that I super grateful for all of you, for all of your attention, because that's the most important thing for us now. And please continue supporting Ukraine. Please continue caring. Reach out to me. I will be happy to talk with you about everything that is happening. So yeah, just really very grateful, and for you, Frank, and for everyone who took hour and a half of their life today to listen to me.
No, that's very nice. So with that, I wish everyone happy holidays. Whichever way you celebrate, hug your loved ones, and we're all lucky. We're all lucky in one way or another.
Yes.
So, and I can't thank William and Sandy and Jason and Mary and Annika, for coming in all the time, and George, and and so many of the other people who came and left tonight, for the whole year of being around for projections, and Jay, for running the show, and dealing with all the craziness that comes with it. So, like, everybody have a great new year. Be safe, and we'll see you on the other side.